Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon & Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. Anthony Paluska joined by Dean McMahon. And today we are lucky enough to have Thomas Gebhart with us. Thomas is an experienced, I'm going to call you a professional services executive, but you've also got experience across all forms of services, education services, support services, across a multitude of organizations. Thomas, we're lucky to have you here. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, first off, thanks for having me. I'm passionate about my craft and I love talking shop. So I really appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with you today. So a little bit about me. I have been working in consulting and customer-facing roles my entire career. I started my career at Accenture. I moved into the dot-com phase, working in FinTech. And I spent the last 20 years working within embedded professional services and support organizations within high-growth software companies. So I've been able to see a number of different things within the growth and transformation of some of these organizations. I've worked in a variety of industries, including healthcare, wholesale and distribution, consumer industrial products, which has given me a broad spectrum of experiences how we deal with different types of organizations and how you can manage and influence change within them. I'm passionate about developing teams. I focus on execution, and I've been really fortunate to be a part of some great organizations, to work with great leaders that have helped mentored me, and I do a lot of work along those lines to help mentor others.
Great, wonderful, Thomas. So Thomas, I want to get us started today with actually a topic that I've been observing, and then we've been kind of wrestling with throughout the community over the past couple of months or so. And there's this trend we're seeing in the organization across the industry, I'm sorry, where PS organizations are being asked to do something different and play a different kind of role in their organization than they had been asked to play historically. And I think it's unclear the primary driver of this, but it's one of two things is happening. Either the organization is saying product revenues are declining, therefore we need to find growth in other areas. We're not going to be able to rely so much on pull through, and our PS organization needs to be a growth lever for us and control a bit of its own destiny. Or we've got really experienced consulting based professional services leaders coming into these roles and saying there's such an opportunity to extract more value and provide more value to our clients, that we ought to be providing more consultative type services and helping our clients achieve different and better outcomes beyond just product implementation, which requires us to control our own destiny. But in either situation, PS organizations seem to be at least shifting a little bit from primarily technical to more consultative. Where everybody is, they're all at different stages of it. But what's very clear is that the industry and PS organizations across the industry are going through transformations right now. And transformations are things that we've seen in lots of different ways. I know you have plenty of experience with that. Um, just talk about transformations at a high level for a moment, and why do companies struggle so much with changing who they are at their core and moving into what's new and what's needed for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're spot on. I mean, these are some of the things that I've seen, driving towards more outcomes. Customers are asking for more than just setting up a system, and leaving. They're asking for industry expertise, best practices and implementation, bringing IP forward to the table. So this can, show up in a whole variety of ways, regardless of how your professional services team might be structured and what you're trying to move to. Um, there's a couple of things that I see happen, and why I see some companies struggle with this. Sometimes there's this concept of what got us here won't get us there, Right. And I think as the nature of, customer demands change, and as, software as a service continues to be part of everyday activities, we have to think about how we continue to grow and change and meet the needs of those customers. I think, another factor that I've seen is, sometimes it's hard to transform when things are going well. And, at times, I've been a part of restructuring efforts where perhaps there's a little bit more of a burning platform and you're making change and transformation out of a need to survive or shift. But sometimes when things are going well, there may not be that burning platform, if you will, to say, hey, you know what, we really need to go ahead and make some of these changes, and thinking really forward 2, 3 steps ahead with what are the things that our customers are asking for? What are the things that we need to think about internally in order to better service our needs in the future, and whether that's to be more consultative, more prescriptive, reducing costs, increasing margins. I mean, these are all things that are factors that play into an overall transformation. I think, maybe just another thing is, sometimes we assume that transformations are sort of once and done projects, right? Something like a tactical reorg or a small system implementation. We don't always look at some of the cultural leadership aspects that come into play as part of a broader transformation effort. Again, coming back to some of those things, some of those outcomes may be internal, some of those outcomes may be external, but those are some things that, I see companies needing to spend more time on, regardless of the nature of the project.
Yeah, I think your point is very true, and we've seen this as well, right? This concept of we think we want to transform, and we know that there's an end state that we want to be at eventually, but if we don't have that burning platform, then it becomes very easy for us to slip into the behaviors of let's do this one thing, call it a transformation, and then move on. But you actually haven't made it to the end state, and too often organizations backslide in that. Any other points or tips on how to avoid backsliding once you start that transformational effort?
Well, I think some of it is also, really a focus on, how we want to run our business in the future. I learned this working with some companies early on in my career, where uh, if you can imagine a project team with 120 years of collective experience on it, and it sometimes can be very hard to break out of what are those things that we really want to do, that we really want to change in our organization. And having that as your North Star, if you will, of a few things that really have to change in terms of um, either operations, systems, whatever it is that you're trying to change there. Um, what are the things you really want to do in the future, and how you want to run your business? And that's a question that I've asked internal teams, I've asked customer teams as well, as you start to see some of that backsliding and do, hey, this is what we've always done. This is some of the things that work. I mean, you'd be surprised at what folks can hang on to. It might be an org change, org structure. I've seen people hang on to spreadsheets as the keys to the kingdom, as really the key to their business. And sometimes if we don't take a step back and think about what it is we really want to accomplish here, you can tend to run into sort of the pattern of recurring and repeating some of the things that perhaps you're trying to get away from.
You find that in the PS organization, those who are most experienced in a narrow domain, technology, or this implementation of this product, and they get rewarded for that over time, career, and now we need to do something different. To Anthony's point earlier, now we're going to be playing a bigger role in the customer and a more advisory role. They resist that, I think, sometimes because it hits them right against their strength. I am known for this. I am paid for this. And the very people who don't like to coach others sometimes because of their domain specialty are the very people we relied on at one time and now are the
Yeah,
roadblocks.
I've seen that. I've seen that a number of times where folks are either had an expectation that I could build my career going down one path, and don't necessarily want to move outside the lane. And then, you know, what is it that the organizational needs, and how much do I need to change, and how much of my discomfort may be outside of that lane of what I know. And I think about good consultants and good leaders. At times you need to have both breadth and depth, right? You need to have a couple of superpowers, but also, as we think about more dynamic environments and facing customer facing organizations, being able to move laterally continues to be a very, very important part of a PS practice, in terms of being able to have movement, working from pooled resources, being able to have teams that can really do more together. And so, yeah, absolutely critical for developing high performing teams.
And Accenture kind of build that, as you said, multiple specialties and ability to move back and forth, but we don't always have that training right now in the PS organizations.
We have a situation where we have our experts in the business that were rewarded, as Dean and you were just alluding to, and in some ways their resistance to change holds us hostage to our current state. But then you also have transformations are driven often from leadership, and whether that's PS leadership or even above that, forcing or suggesting that there's a future state that we need to go to, but we don't necessarily have the buy-in and the support of the entire organization. Speak a little bit about the role that leaders need to play to help our experts understand that they have a role and value in a future state, and that the rest of the team not only can get there, but should want to get there as the organization moves to where it's headed.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think as we're thinking of the kind of the leadership angle on all of this, we could talk a little bit about executive sponsorship, but also developing leaders that can continue. I think about the element of being a force multiplier at times, where your leaders need to develop other leaders, and as other leaders develop their own leadership DNA, they have to continue to have broader influence within the organization. And as leaders, at times you have to also step out of your own way in order to help facilitate broader changes. Letting go of some of that past, I think, as much as we think about maybe a consulting or technical skill, leaders sometimes we get tied into some of the things that we do as well. And at times you got to let go of some of the past and some of the things you might even be good at, hand it off to somebody else in order to develop other leadership skills that may help to broader the kind of the broader organizational transformation.
So speak to the leaders out there for this question. You're in a situation, you know that you want to transform. You've selected the destination and where you want to head as an organization and why you want to get there. How do you actually go about taking those first steps to operationalize the transformation across people, process, technology?
Well, I think one thing that's very critical, and sometimes companies overlook this, is, and I've been a part of projects where this has gone well, and maybe projects that haven't necessarily gone as well. Um, you're getting executive and strategic alignment around what it is that you're trying to do, right? Transformation can be very difficult. Not everyone's going to be happy. Some people will get angry. And so trying to build consensus and everybody being happy about a transformation isn't necessarily something that happens all the time. So I can't emphasize enough making sure that as you are building a plan, that you have good buy-in from your executives, what you're trying to accomplish. If you don't have that, you really run the risk of talking past one another. And sometimes when I think of transformation, it's not if you're going to hit speed bumps; it's when you're going to hit speed bumps.
Yeah, any best practices you have there on how to best achieve that alignment?
Yeah. Um, for me, and some of the things that have worked well is trying to, I don't want to say simplify, but trying to get focused on what those objectives are, right? If you're trying to go through an effort of making a professional services team profitable, right? If you're trying to change the process from being more prescriptive to, or more consultative to more prescriptive, if you're trying to implement a new methodology, I have found that, trying to simplify what some of those objectives are really can help. Um, I think setting clear timelines on when you think it may be, without timelines, we have a difficult time holding ourselves accountable. Sometimes we miss those timelines in transformation. It's not always a clear cut, but you got to have an anchor to pull against when it comes to timelines. And then I think frequent updates in which the story can be told is also important to keep your executive alignment and those objectives in focus.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Alignment doesn't just occur at the beginning of the operationalizing the transformation. It's an ongoing process to make sure that you continue to maintain that alignment, because as soon as you fall out of alignment on that, the rest of that transformation can unravel a bit. So sorry, I did interrupt you a little bit. You were walking through some steps on how to operationalize transformation, and we were on kind of alignment and objective setting. Are there other steps there?
Yeah, there's some other things that I think that are important. I mean, I think once you have your executive and strategic alignment, some of your objectives nailed, and then some of the more tactical things, like what are the skills that you're going to need as part of this? You know, what sort of leadership abilities do you need? What sort of leadership, doing a skills index of the things that you have and the things that you're going to need, making sure you understand what the as is and the to be really looks like. And um, then you can start to augment the teams in terms of how you may or may not be able to execute these things and where there are shortcomings and where that there are strengths. If I could tell a quick story about, you know, one of the big transformations I was in years ago, um, we were at a point where a professional services team was not profitable and the sales motion was handled by the sales organization. We needed to make a wholesale shift into uh, really owning the process within services as well as lift our margins. And this required training of people. This required some restructuring of the team. This required um, really some cultural shift between how the sales motion was going to work as we introduced a new body into the sales cycle. And we did the process work, we did the training work, we set up the systems appropriately, but we still missed some things, right? We underestimated the amount of work it was going to be, and we underestimated the amount of cultural shift that was going to be required to work and integrate with the sales organization. But if we had not had that executive alignment around what it is that we were trying to achieve here, as we hit the first speed bump, it would have been really easy to throw up our hands and say, this isn't working and we need to go back. But we had our focus and what our objectives really were, and we were able to work through some of those speed bumps along the way, add the resources, add the additional training we need, continue to sponsor this at all levels in the organization. And we eventually got there, and it really actually became very successful. We went from professional services being sort of an add-on to almost a challenge to integrate professional services into the broader software sales cycle to really being part of the closed cycle and really an integrated part of what the sales motion was going to look like. So is I think through some of those things, if we had not had that objective setting and the executive alignment, we could have been really easy just to revert back to what we had done previously.
Do you find when you even after you get alignment on something that big that, and I'll use like a steering committee as an example, that they really have to be reminded about the objectives all the time, right? You almost have to start all the discussions with, "Remember where we're going and why? Remember where we're going and why?"
I think that's a great point because then sometimes we get distracted or we try to put too much scope into the project or we try to add new things, and it's why it comes back to having a very strong North Star. And executives got lots of things going on, right? And so understanding what the progress is, what the risks are, and where you need their help. That constant reminder within a steering committee type of format can be a really effective way to continue to drive the transformation that you need. Because very rarely it's not just a once and done activity. It takes care and feeding and more. I think it's sometimes it requires more care and feeding than it does even on the implementation side. I mean, those are some of the things that these things take time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony and I once worked on a huge company and drove a very successful transformation on their top line and valuation, and yet it completely failed because we could not keep alignment and the top executive playing their role driving continual alignment. So even though they were completely successful and going to change their valuation to two or three fold, they didn't because it was inconvenient for a few people and they were able to play the antibody on a continual basis, right? And that's the challenge of transformation, right? It's not, as you said, it's not good for everybody. It's good for the company, but it's not good for everybody individually.
Yeah. No, I think those are all fantastic points.
Do you have a story of a transformation either really liked the outcome or really failed? And if it failed, you need to blame someone else, Thomas.
One of the projects that I led was a implementation of a professional services automation solution, and this wasn't just a lift and shift of one solution to the other. This was lifting from a solution that perhaps we'd really outgrown and overused and wasn't necessarily set up correctly, and then moved into a much more complicated and sophisticated PSA tool. And as we thought through some of this, it really became evident that there were going to be new roles. New roles, new skill sets. It actually was a bit of a catalyst to help mature our organization because it really forced our hand to get sharp and crisp on things like accountabilities for project managers, accountabilities for consultants. Something as simple as getting your time in on time really became part of our operational DNA that forced our hand in many ways to become more disciplined in how we approach things.
Yeah, yeah. And how long did that take?
It was a good 11, 12-month project to get it stood up. And then I think we spent a good 12 months normalizing it. What we thought we wanted going into this implementation. Um, I take something like we thought we wanted to do forecasting. As we got into it, forecasting is actually a pretty hard thing to do. So we shifted the focus back to blocking and tackling, budget to actuals, time to commit, time to value. We got to some more fundamental elements there that to really normalize some of our day-to-day operations.
How much did your team have to get developed and changed throughout that journey?
Um, Probably a little bit more than we anticipated. I think we had some really good, we had really very committed resources. We had folks who really wanted to make the change, but perhaps maybe hadn't seen it in another environment to really believe in it. And so it took some time to get their buy-in that these were some of the things that we really needed to do to mature our practice. Some of the things that may have seemed like busy work were actually at a macro level really important for the team, really important for the practice. And on the whole, it drove us to be better practitioners along the way.
No, it's great. It's great when you can develop the team through the journey like that. There too often everyone's tempted to bring in somebody that has seen it work in a future state and say, let these people be the model for how to lead and guide and partly run our business in the new way. But often they haven't been the ones that help build it. So if you can take your team through the entire journey, which takes some incredible leadership and guide and mentorship skills throughout that process. But to get them from kind of point A to point B, those that made that journey have they understand and they're bought into where we are in the future. They knew what it took to get there. They stayed true to some of the core and the roots of what they enjoyed about the role previously. You get all the benefits associated with some of that, but it's not easy to take your team through that journey because it does take a lot more hands-on coaching to help guide them there.
It's a good point. I mean, you asked me earlier about, some of the things we do to operationalize transformation. One of the things that I think as technologists and people in technology, I think maybe we drive to we have to build everything ourselves. We have to know everything ourselves. We're problem solvers. At times we need to be able to be willing to ask for help. And I think as we think about the as is, sometimes you have new ideas, but maybe that third party in there can help with some of that transformational effort, almost a third leg on the stool, so to speak. And I think about things like your podcast. I mean, there's great advice here that shows, what other companies might be doing. I'm a big fan of TSIA. I hope I can mention them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so TSIA is a great macro level view of where the collective puck is going, and are we in line with what other industries are doing or what other companies are doing, or is this confirming or denying some of our assumptions? And I also think even as leaders, we may or may not have all the skill sets, bringing in coaches, bringing in trainers to help with some of the skill sets that may be deficient. We started talking about, the skills that are needed for a transformation. We may not have all of the ability in house to be able to do that. And so at times, bringing in outside consultants, trainers, coaches to help augment your team through this transition can also be a very powerful thing that is not always the most intuitive thing to do out of the gate.
Yeah, it's difficult to imagine any team having the right skill mix to run the business in the current state, plus the right skill mix to transform an organization, plus the right skill mix to operate in the future state. Because there are very stark differences between the skills needed for each of those three um, phases of that whole process. And so there's the sprinkling of how do you bring in the right level of expertise? How do you find people that have operated and lived in that before? How do you lean on advice and others that have gone through that journey to help upskill everybody? And then how do you coach and mentor your team through that process so that you can retain as many of them to operate in the future state as possible? Because that's the ultimate goal there. So yeah, it's a puzzle, right? The talent aspect of that is a puzzle to try and get the right pieces to fit together to actually get us not, the proverbial change the wheels on the bus as you're driving down the road, right? I mean, it does have it does have some complexity there.
Yeah. I oftentimes think about it as the art and the science, right?
Yeah.
The science, there's plenty of methodologies. You build project charters, you build skill matrices, you build communication plans. But sometimes it's that art of knowing where you have spheres of influence, where you have people within the organization that can help. Leadership isn't always a top-down, something you're going to find in an org chart. Sometimes you got to think laterally about informal and influential leaders that at all levels in the organization, and as well as some of where you may need to sprinkle things in. That's where a little bit of where the art comes in, and having some dynamics within your project team to be able to address things as they come up.
Thomas, this has been just super. We want to have you back, and as I told you earlier, it's because of your great haircut. But this has been very powerful. Leave us with a couple of pieces of advice that you would net out for people going through these tough transformations.
So there's a few things that I think about. First off, transformations can really be, yeah, sometimes people get scared and they change, and there's a lot of great work out there in change management. I think that it's also really an opportunity to build leadership skills within your teams, right? When I think about some of the things that I've personally been a part of, big transformations that perhaps I was in a little bit over my head on, those have provided great opportunities for me personally to grow and change into a more effective leader and a more dynamic leader. So I think as you're thinking through your transformations, not just thinking through hierarchically, but also how do you build leadership as an output of transformation, not just as an input to transformation. And as you go through an organizational change, who are the new leaders that are going to emerge? I talk about nature abhorring a vacuum, right? Where are the vacuums that a transformation may create, and who are the folks that are going to get there to help with it and emerge as stronger leaders as a result of that transformational effort?
Yeah, that's
And sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, and sometimes you got to be able to work through that. And I think that's the other piece is, you know, giving things up in an organization is can be challenging, but at the same time, continuing to have that direction and that North Star around what it is you're trying to accomplish, also super important.
yeah, yeah, and it is uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I mean, by definition, it is uncomfortable. Well, listen, thanks so much. We hope you've enjoyed today.
this has been fantastic.
So we'll have you back, and
I can't wait.
I hope the weather is great there. Our weather is great where I live. So have a good rest of your week.
Yeah, it's a great time of year. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas.
I'm so happy that we took the information on transformation, particularly transformation within the PS organization. So Thomas was just great. Obviously, very knowledgeable about how to motivate across that. I'd like to have him back to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that happen across the way. Not, he talks a lot about alignment, but I still think there's just really hard to move experienced PS people to like the survey that we're working on, that you're taking the lead on, the survey of how do we begin to operate? How many groups are going through the transformation to become more meaningful to their clients, to do more advisory work and less, in addition to implementation. So I would love to talk to him about that.
Yes, obviously a topic that's passionate, that I'm passionate about, and that we've been working on because I do think we are at an inflection point for embedded professional services organizations where we're going to either see the organizations have to transform and become more consultative, control more of their own commercial destiny, drive some of these things forward, at least for a period of time, or they're going to be um, kind of hunker down and revert back to the we're going to be product attached and we're going to support implementation and our role is to help facilitate the product part of this business and that's a business decision and a strategic decision organizations are going to make. I think we're going to see a lot more of the former than the latter. And I think we're already seeing some dabble in that. But to actually get there and to be effective there, it's a transformation of your offers, your talent, your go-to-market approach, how you integrate with the rest of your organization. It fundamentally changes everything about how you operate, even through delivery of your engagements. And um, that's going to require guidance and wisdom of people that have been through other transformations before. And so the guidance that Thomas provided here and others like that, I'd love to keep talking to people about that because I think many are going to need as much help as they can get working through how to get from here to there.
Yeah. Also, I think Thomas comes across as a very solid executive. I mean, one of the things I got from today and the other times I've spent with him, he and I got together, I just find him a very deliberate, solid, professional executive that could work in a very large format, PS, SaaS or non-SaaS environment. And that's also encouraging that we can take our leaders and make them, more sophisticated, more capable, more comfortable in larger, more complex problems. So we'll have it back.
Ooh, yes, we will. Yes, we will. If you enjoyed Thomas and Consultants Way podcast, like and subscribe on YouTube and podcast channels. And if you want to reach out to Dean or I, you can connect with either of us on our LinkedIn pages, or send us an email at podcast@consultantsway.com. And while you're out there on the LinkedIn pages, check out the Consultants Way LinkedIn page and check out the professional services puppets shows that we will have coming out every week. A little bit of humor for those that have some experience living as a PS executive across the technology industry. So we'll see everybody next time.